This is one of my favorite little things to do with the business glossary. Let's talk about why this is important. And I'm obviously, if you have signed up for this session, you probably don't need to tell you why it's important, but I find this to be an effective tool to tell other people who maybe haven't bought in the importance of a business glossary. So this might give you some ideas on how to communicate this to others. First thing, let's talk about sort of the types of questions or situations within your organization that could spawn the need for a glossary. So first, maybe your finance team, payroll team, and employee recruiting team can't agree on what a full-time employee means. Like, that's a very common problem. There's just disagreement and lack of consistency and consensus on terminology and what that means. Maybe someone is looking at a report and they're saying, hey, this report shows a score for at-risk clients. What does that mean? How do we calculate it? So they're seeing some sort of functional or label description on a report or information provided to them, and they don't understand it, and they really want to understand like the specific details, what it means from a business sense, how it's calculated, and maybe even some understanding of where the data is coming from and technically, and what data system as well. How do I pull the current mailing address for a prospect from our CRM? So this is a person who maybe they got a request to extract something, information that includes current mailing address, and they're asked to do that from the CRM. They're trying to develop that integration, and they say, well, okay, first of all, what does current mailing address mean? And second of all right, how are we pulling that? Do we have a standard way that we pull that out of our CRM? Someone said, hey, I need a report that's listing customer satisfaction rates for all licensed customers by product and by number of years licensed. So this is a person who is coming within your organization with a question. They're throwing out some terminology. They want to understand customer satisfaction rate, licensed customers, product separation, numbers of years licensed, and all those things. If that's then being handed over to a report writer, they're going to say, like, all right, what do they mean by that? Are they going to make their own assumptions, or are they going to be able to go to some reference to make sure they're using the right terms? Or if you're this person who's making the request, maybe they don't know the exact kind of terminology to use here, which we'll see. Another example, and this is a good one we'll talk about too, is all right, so you have your data warehouse team that they've just built a great model for calculating at-risk clients, right? So they, this is coming from the perspective of they build out this whole data system, and maybe they really didn't engage in a glossary in any way, shape, or form, but they've sort of defined this new thing, which is an at-risk student, and they are at-risk client, and they want to help others know about it and use the same rules and calculations. So this is something that they want to maybe promote into the glossary. So all of these things, the blue items here represent things that in conversations around your data, where there's value in engaging with a glossary, right? Either to get clarity on what this thing means for something that's already been documented in the glossary, or for someone to say, hey, I'm using this terminology that isn't yet documented, right? That we do not have in our glossary, and we should create it or decide if this is the appropriate terminology to use, or maybe I need more precise terminology as well. Right. So the other thing about glossary that's important is that it's oftentimes very difficult to get people to understand the level of specificity and precision that are important to document around your business terms when it comes to data. One of my favorite expressions to use when I'm talking about a data-related project is that computers are stupid. I mean, what I mean by that is that, if you're asking if you're writing code or a query or some process to pull data out of a system in order to answer a question, you have to be incredibly precise to get the exact information. A person doing kind of those steps are going to have a lot of assumptions in how they're doing it, but we want to basically document a repeatable process. So we need to be incredibly precise. And one thing that is, there's sort of two levels of knowledge that can that necessitate a need for a business glossary as a reference. I mean, it applies to everyone universally, but obviously someone who has no idea what anything means, right? So they're sort of a newbie in the world of your data, and they're coming and saying, I'm trying to need a see how many undergraduate English faculty members are in your institution, and I don't know how we're defining what a undergraduate is, right? So I'm really new to this, and I don't know what that is. So the glossary is a really good starting point to learn about what this means. Now, the other side of the equation, which oftentimes people don't really realize has sort of an equivalent, if not more need for glossary, is people who have so much knowledge about the data and have embedded in their brain a very, very long history of making detailed assumptions and decisions around their data, that they don't know how to communicate around their data without in a way that exposes all the assumptions they're making. So, you know, oh, for the last 10 years I've been writing a report, and 7 years ago I learned that, oh, if I'm trying to pull undergraduate data, I need to make sure that people can be an undergraduate and a graduate, so I need to deal with that. And oftentimes it's you're just sort of too knowledgeable to understand that the people that you're communicating don't have that level of knowledge, and you can actually talk generally with and with uncommunicated assumptions. So forcing people on both sides of that equation, people who have like no idea what this thing is and are just talking very generally, and people who are who have a very specific understanding of something, but they're also communicating generally, to force them to agree on, you know, a defined term or business definition that creates transparent clarity on what they mean, that none of those assumptions from the person who has years of experience are hidden. They're exposed in that definition, and from the other person they can learn what they need to do. So this example, how many undergraduate English faculty members are in your institution? For a layperson outside of that, like, you know, higher ed world or whatever, they might think, oh, that's an easy question. But you can break down so many parts of this into points of failure or points of disagreement on how to produce this data. So the first is like how many. So that doesn't mean how many. Does that refer to like a head count or a full-time count or full-time equivalent in terms of faculty? What if you've got a bunch of part-time employees, or you're counting them all as one or whatever? Undergraduate, does undergraduate include faculty who teach undergraduate courses only, or include faculty who teach undergraduate and graduate courses? Or you're doing like a unique thing for just undergraduate? How are you sort of determining that? English, does English include writing and composition, literary courses, English as a second language? So we've got this qualifier that oh, it's an English faculty. What attribute is that really applying to, and what does it mean? A faculty member, does faculty include all institution faculty, or only tenured professors, or adjunct, or teaching assistants? Are we counting everyone equally? You know, how are we counting this? Now we're getting really granular here when we say are, like at what point in time should the answer be valid? So, hey, your question is how many undergraduate English faculty members are in your institution? So are we saying, you know, currently at this moment in time, at the beginning of the term, as of some census date, something else? What are we looking here for the numbers? And then in, like, are we talking about, you know, does this include faculty and who are only on premise, or people maybe doing virtual classes, or maybe that's through some partner? You know, what does it mean to be in your institution? Your is this other thing, like you're talking about one location, multiple locations, all these things. And an institution, or are you talking about all schools? Maybe, you know, is it, I know we mentioned undergraduate, what about, we've got some continuing ed classes and all that. So these things are you know, just an example of how having, if you were to ask this question and force people to sort of define the terminology for each area and create that level of clarity, you can have any one of the variations in understanding of this sort of breakdown in this sentence request can lead to a difference in response. You know, you could get, you know, 10% more with one answer and 20% less with another, based on your interpretation of these things. And it is, you know, there's many different reasons on why to do a business glossary, but one of the easiest ones to talk about is establishing trust and confidence in your data. There's a whole separate thing that you can say that's a sort of equal value of like efficiency and reusability of knowledge, right? So that you're not trying to, every time you ask a question, to rediscover what things mean and how to do stuff. But if you're talking about consistency, you know, two people who are trying to answer this question or making their own assumptions about what things mean and not sort of referring back to specific terminology, you know, can end up with one person says, oh, well, we have 25 undergraduate English faculty members in our institution, and the other person says, oh, we have 28, right? That's not that big of a difference. And in fact, maybe what the original question was for, what they were asking about, it really wouldn't matter what the decision is if it's 25 or 28. Maybe it does, but let's just say it doesn't. If you have two different people who give the person asking this question two different answers, it's going to undermine their trust in the data no matter what. So the inconsistency in data really creates lack of trust, lack of use, and then it totally diminishes any value you have in the data within your organization and any outcomes around having data-driven decisions that are effective. Right? Again, even if the difference between 25 and 28 would have had the same outcome of someone for what decision someone would have made, the actual outcome is probably that they're not going to make a decision at all. They're going to be like, oh, you know, I don't know. I can't trust anything, so I can't make a decision. Okay. So you all probably can have your own example for whatever type of data you're dealing with, where each one of these level of specificity matters. You know, it's interesting if any of you are lawyers or work with lawyers or are married to lawyers or whatever, you know, or you're looking at contracts, you see that contracts often have a, you know, a sort of a glossary in them, or they have a capital letter words. Oh, you have capital C client, you know, capital E employee or whatever, and those things have very specific meanings, and that's a thing that's been adopted by the legal world to make sure that there is real consistency and understanding when you see something in a legal document that refers to capital C client, you know what that means, as opposed to just a general terminology, you know, someone just throwing around that word without legal binding. And that's what you really want to do with your data and how you talk about data. Glossary is the way to do it. Lastly, I'll say that, you know, creating glossary content is an art. It is, I think I've talked about this before. A lot of times you have people who say, hey, we're just going to start with glossary because that's sort of the easy stuff. People talk to us as a vendor or as a plan, like this is where they want to start. It is perfectly appropriate to say we're going to start with glossary because it's incredibly valuable. But if you say you're going to start with glossary because it's easy, then you're making a big mistake. Because the glossary content requires, you know, orchestration, collaboration, and ongoing human effort. You know, it's incredibly powerful, and it's a beautiful thing when you do it right. But don't lie to yourself to say that like this is the easy part, because anything where you have to get like agreement and consensus among human beings in your organization is the thing that is without a doubt the hardest, right? And as I talked about last time, the technical stuff of like documenting your data systems and what you have in your data models and things like that is oftentimes thought of being hard because there's this sort of initial technical barrier to kind of get it set up and ingest that data. But it requires very little human curation to get that raw content in. And so we recommend, you know, prioritizing both of these things equally and not and be aware that if you decide that you're focusing solely on glossary content, there is a very good chance that you're going to run out of steam if you don't have other things going on at the same time or other reasons for people to create. Because glossary in it as a vacuum on its own isn't going to add a whole lot of value unless you can connect it to other things, which we'll talk about over the next several weeks. But anyway, long story short, the takeaway for this slide is to say it's hard. It's okay that it's hard, but it's incredibly valuable. But from a pragmatic approach, if you don't address the fact that this is difficult stuff, you're going to be sad because you're going to run out of steam. All right. It's also important to sort of think about how all the different people within your organization, how they might interact with the glossary and the different roles. We're going to keep coming back to this throughout the slide. I think that the glossary has value to every single person in your organization. You know, anyone who's sort of requesting or consuming data is going to be, you know, want to access that. Anyone who's doing technical development is going to want to access that. You know, maybe your kind of like oversight committee isn't that interested in this piece of content, but all in all, I think that this is one of the most universally valuable pieces of information that you can add, as well as being one of the most difficult to create.